Black CEO mocked at billionaire's mansion hours later. She erased their $5B fortune. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Oh my God, did no one teach you your place? The words cracked through the air, like crystal shattering on marble. Heads turned. Laughter paused mid-note. In the grand ballroom of the Van Dorn mansion, surrounded by chandeliers and a sea of designer gowns, time itself seemed to hesitate. Charlotte Van Dorn stood in her crimson gown, a diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light as she jabbed a manicured finger toward a woman in navy blue. Her voice was sugar-coated venom. "You're just a servant pretending to be a guest," she sneered. Security must have made a mistake. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man in a tuxedo choked on his champagne, while others hid their amusement behind flutes of golden bubbles. The orchestra faltered. Someone whispered, "Who invited her?" At the center of it all, Amara Lewis didn't flinch. She stood tall, her dark eyes calm, her expression unreadable, an ocean with no wind. The spill of red wine on her wrist looked like a wound, but her stillness radiated something far more dangerous: control. Charlotte's laughter filled the silence. "Oh, come on, don't look at me like that," she said, turning toward her audience. "We all know these charity things attract volunteers." A soft wave of polite chuckles followed. Phones rose sleek, black, hungry to capture the moment. The ballroom, once filled with polite chatter, had become an arena. Behind her, a crystal chandelier trembled, scattering light like frozen tears across the marble floor. The scene glittered, cruel and perfect. One of the guests, a gray-haired man dripping in inherited arrogance, leaned to his wife. "Every party needs entertainment," he whispered. She smiled without looking up. Amara finally spoke, her tone so even it cut sharper than any insult. "Funny," she said. "I thought this was a fundraiser, not an audition for cruelty." Charlotte's face tightened. "Excuse me? You heard me." Amara's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It simply existed, clean, deliberate, grounded. "But please continue. Everyone seems entertained." Their self in my prut. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the laughter resumed, uneasy, fractured. Someone muttered, "She doesn't know who she's talking to." Charlotte smiled again, brittle and bright. "Oh, darling, you should be careful. People like you don't get second chances in rooms like this." The words "people like you" hit harder than a slap. Around them, faces tightened, eyes flickered away. The cruelty was public. The shame, intended to be eternal. But the air was changing. The laughter began to wilt. The orchestra hesitated mid-melody, as if sensing something its players could not name. A drop of wine slid from the rim of Amara's glass, landing with a soft patter against marble. The sound was small, but in the silence, it thundered. She placed the glass down gently, precisely, as if setting the tempo for what would come next. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on each face, the spectators, the sycophants, the ones who smiled to hide their fear of status. And then she looked back at Charlotte. "No anger," the narrator's voice breathes over the moment. "No outrage, just the slow, exact calm of someone who has seen this scene before and rewritten it every single time." The chandelier light cooled to silver. The temperature dropped a degree. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Charlotte tilted her head, mistaking silence for defeat. "That's what I thought," she said. "Stay quiet, sweetheart. Servants should be seen, not heard." And then Amara smiled. Not a smile of surrender, a promise. The crowd didn't understand yet, but they would. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Amara, because this was the moment the world should have realized. Silence was never weakness. It was warning. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The chandelier trembled above them, scattering fractured light across marble like pieces of a broken halo. Then came the sound, a single drip of wine striking the floor. Soft, precise, unforgiving. Every camera froze mid-record. The air, once perfumed with laughter, thickened into something sharp enough to cut. Charlotte's smirk faltered. "Well?" she said, trying to recover the rhythm that had just slipped through her manicured fingers. "No witty comeback?" Amara didn't answer. She simply turned her head slow, deliberate, her gaze cutting through perfume, silk, and ego like a laser through glass. That look carried weight, the kind that made predators remember they could bleed. In the corner, the pianist hesitated, fingers hovering above the keys. The melody died without permission. Glasses stilled midair. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to hold their breath. The narrator's voice slides in quiet, steady. Something invisible just shifted. The temperature dropped, the hierarchy cracked, and the crowd could feel it even if they didn't yet understand it. Amara bent slightly, picking up a fallen napkin. She blotted the red stain on her wrist with surgeon-like precision. No trembling, no rush. Each movement a declaration of dignity. When she stood upright again, she looked taller as if the room itself had shrunk. A man near the bar whispered, "Who is she?" Another answered under his breath, "Someone you don't humiliate and walk away from." Charlotte forced a brittle laugh. "Oh, please, don't act like I committed a crime. She should be grateful we let her in." The word grateful snapped something in the silence. It echoed not through sound, but through the tightening of every throat in the room. The pianist lowered his hands completely. Amara turned toward Charlotte. "Gratitude?" she said softly. "Interesting word. It usually belongs to those who've received something of value." Charlotte blinked. "Excuse me? But I haven't received anything here," Amara continued. "Not kindness, not respect. Just proof that old money can still be poor in manners." Murmurs rippled like wind through crystal. A few guests glanced around, unsure whether to laugh or leave. Charlotte's cheeks flushed crimson. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Amara's eyes didn't flinch. "I don't think," she said. "I know." This was new or grated Mac in a word. And then she smiled, not wide, just enough to send a chill through the crowd. It wasn't defiance. It was prophecy. Across the ballroom, the event photographer hesitated. His camera lowered slowly, almost reverently. In his lens, he wasn't capturing humiliation anymore. He was capturing a turning point. Charlotte stepped closer, her heels clicking like countdowns. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "This is our world." Amara's reply came calm and exact. "Then maybe your world is smaller than you think." Silence. Even the lights seemed to dim for a breath. The narrator's tone lowers cinematic, near whisper. "That's the thing about silence. People mistake it for surrender. But real power doesn't shout, it rearranges gravity." Charlotte scoffed, turning to the crowd for reassurance. But the crowd had changed. Their laughter had evaporated. Curiosity replaced cruelty. Eyes darted, uncertain where to stand. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, his hand trembling slightly. Amara reached out not for a drink, but to steady the glass before it fell. "Careful," she said gently. "Things tend to break when people stop paying attention." The words hung there, impossible to ignore. Charlotte stared at her, speechless for the first time that night. And then, almost mercifully, the orchestra resumed a single, cautious note stretching into the silence, trying to pretend the world hadn't just tilted. But everyone knew. The gala was no longer about charity. It was about consequence. That night, the cameras captured the humiliation. But by morning, they'd be searching for her name. The footage would circulate the woman in blue, the calm one, the mystery at the mansion. People would argue in the comments, she looked too composed. She knew something. And they'd be right. Because Amara Lewis had not walked into that ballroom by accident. She had built it. Years earlier, long before marble floors and charity galas, Amara was the daughter of a housekeeper in Atlanta. Her mother scrubbed penthouse bathrooms for the kind of women who now sip champagne under crystal light. Every evening, Amara would sit in the service hallway with a stack of library books, listening to laughter echo down corridors she wasn't allowed to enter. Those walls taught her two lessons: that access could be bought and respect could not. At 21, she graduated from MIT on a scholarship no one expected her to win. At 25, she was already building algorithms that could predict global market shifts faster than Wall Street analysts. The same year, she founded a small data firm in her mother's kitchen, Helix Global Ventures, with one goal: to design systems that made power accountable. What began with 3 laptops and a dream became a multi-billion-dollar empire spanning finance, clean energy, and AI ethics. By 48, Amara had quietly become one of the most influential figures in the world, a woman whose decisions could move entire economies. But she never appeared on magazine covers, never chased applause. She understood the value of being underestimated. The Van Dorn family, on the other hand, understood nothing but entitlement. Their wealth stretched back generations: steel, railroads, and privilege fossilized into power. Their father, Theodore Van Dorn, had turned legacy into vanity. His daughter Charlotte turned vanity into cruelty. What no one at that party knew was that the Van Dorn Group was drowning in silent debt. A $5 billion investment from Helix Global Ventures was their lifeline, the one deal keeping their empire from collapse. And the woman they had just mocked in front of the world was the signature on that deal. The narrator's voice cuts through the timeline like a scalpel. They thought they were entertaining their friends, but what they really did was sign their own obituary. Back at the mansion, hours after the party, the laughter was gone. Charlotte's phone buzzed nonstop: press requests, rumors, headlines. But across the city, in a penthouse office lit only by the Chicago skyline, Amara stood alone, her reflection merging with the glass. On her desk lay the contract, the Van Dorn investment package still unsigned. Next to it, a photograph. Her mother in a maid's uniform, smiling through exhaustion. Amara's assistant appeared at the door. "Miss Lewis, are we proceeding with the Van Dorn funding?" Amara looked down at the photo once more. Then she reached for her pen, wrote a single line across the front page, not her signature, but 2 words: "Terminate deal." The assistant hesitated. "Effective immediately?" Amara's tone was quiet, almost kind. "No delays. Justice doesn't wait for morning." Outside, snow began to fall, soft, relentless. It gathered on the windows, blurring the city lights into ghosts. The narrator returns, softer now. Power doesn't roar. It whispers. It recalibrates the universe with steady hands. In that moment, the hum of computers filled the office, the quiet pulse of money rerouting itself through networks, the sound of an empire collapsing in real time. $5 billion. Gone. One act. No apology. Amara Lewis didn't just pull her investment. She pulled the curtain off an illusion, and by sunrise, the world would see who truly belonged in every room. It began with a phone vibrating on a marble counter. One small sound, swallowed by the silence of a penthouse high above Chicago. Amara didn't move at first. She just watched the skyline, cold glass towers reflecting themselves into infinity. The city never slept, but tonight it would learn how silence could end empires. The phone buzzed again. Her assistant's voice came through, calm but trembling. "Ma'am, the Van Dorn transfer is queued. Shall we proceed?" Amara's fingers hovered above the screen for a long moment. Outside, the snow fell harder, each flake like ash from something that hadn't burned yet. Then she spoke. 3 words. "Freeze everything. Now." Intense self. Gray down in armaments. There was no shout, no rage. Just authority so quiet it made the air tighten. Within seconds, the command pulsed through Helix's encrypted network. Servers hummed to life in New York, London, Singapore. Algorithms executed emergency protocols written years ago for moments exactly like this: moments when justice required precision, not noise. Across the city, the Van Dorn family's financial director was still awake, sipping brandy in a downtown office. He looked up as his monitor flickered: account errors, red alerts, access denied. He blinked, refreshed the page, frowned. Then his phone rang. "Sir," his assistant stammered, "all Helix funding has been frozen. Every pending transaction terminated." "What? That's impossible. We signed yesterday." "No, sir. The system says the deal was canceled by Miss Amara Lewis herself." The director went pale. The brandy trembled in his glass. At that same moment, halfway across the ocean, traders in London noticed the sudden absence of liquidity in Van Dorn-linked portfolios. A quiet panic rippled through terminals. Brokers called one another, searching for confirmation. None came. It didn't need to. The data spoke first. Helix Global Ventures had withdrawn $5 billion from the Van Dorn Group, instantly, irrevocably. The narrator's voice slides in low, deliberate. When most people think of revenge, they picture rage. But the powerful know better. The sharpest blade in the world is in executed order, time-stamped, and silent. Back in Chicago, Amara's assistant confirmed, "All accounts secured, Miss Lewis. Every trace of their access revoked." Amara nodded once. "And the charities connected to their shell foundations?" "Redirected. The Rose Initiative has received the full reallocation." "Good," she said. "Let the money finally do something pure." She walked toward the window, the city lights painting gold edges along her silhouette. Her reflection stared back, not pride, not satisfaction, just completion. A small chime sounded news notifications beginning to spread across financial networks. Helix Global Ventures pulls out of $5B deal. Van Dorn Holdings faces sudden funding collapse. The snow outside thickened, muting the sirens below. The city didn't know yet what had happened, only that something seismic had shifted. Inside the mansion, where laughter had once filled the ballroom, Theodore Van Dorn was now pacing beneath the same chandelier that had watched his daughter's cruelty. His phone lit up with calls he didn't want to answer. "Dad!" Charlotte's voice cracked through the line. "Something's wrong. Our accounts." "I know," he snapped. "I'm handling it." But his tone betrayed the truth. He wasn't. No one could. The narrator's voice returns, colder now. In less than 6 minutes, a dynasty built on arrogance lost everything, not through scandal, not through crime, but through consequence. Amara turned off her phone. The city outside was a blur of white and gold. Somewhere beneath it all, the Van Dorn empire was crumbling, not with noise, but with precision. Justice, she thought, didn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes, it only needed Wi-Fi and willpower. She closed her laptop, exhaled once, and whispered to no one in particular, "Let the silence finish the work." By dawn, Chicago's skyline glowed in bruised gold, the kind of light that doesn't warm, only exposes. In the Van Dorn mansion, chaos had replaced champagne. The family boardroom, once a gallery of smug portraits and leather chairs, now pulsed with panic. Screens flickered with error messages. Phones rang unanswered. Each notification hit like artillery. Charlotte stormed in, her crimson gown replaced by a silk robe, mascara streaked down her face. "What's happening?" she screamed. "The news says Helix pulled everything." Her father, Theodore Van Dorn, didn't look up from his phone. "Quiet," he muttered. "We just need to contact Amara Lewis and—" "You mean that woman?" Charlotte snapped. "The one you said was lucky to even be in our orbit?" Silence. Theodore's jaw tightened. "That woman," he said, "was our investor." A voice interrupted from the doorway. Calm, firm, uninvited. "Correction," said a man in a gray suit. "She was your investor. Now she's your creditor." They turned. A legal team of 6 stood in the entrance, Helix Global's internal counsel, black folders in hand. Their presence felt surgical, precise. The lead attorney placed a document on the table. "By order of Helix Global Ventures, all financial ties between Helix and the Van Dorn Group are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Pending loans and guarantees have been recalled." Theodore blinked. "You can't just—" "We already did," the attorney replied. Behind him, an assistant connected a laptop to the projector. The Helix logo appeared, followed by a cascading list of accounts: offshore holdings, shell companies, property, trusts all frozen. Charlotte stared. "How do they know about those?" The attorney's tone didn't change. "Helix owns the firm that managed them." The narrator's voice cuts in, quiet, surgical. When she said freeze everything, she didn't just mean money. She meant control, equity, access, reputation, the entire operating ecosystem of arrogance. Theodore lunged for his phone. "I'll call our lawyers." "You already did," the attorney said. "We own their retainer." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte's breath hitched. "This is a mistake. It has to be." "No, Miss Van Dorn," the attorney replied gently. "It's math." He turned to the projection screen. As of 6:42 a.m., the Van Dorn Group's liabilities exceed its liquid assets by $5.1 billion. Helix has initiated asset recovery under Clause 14B. "What does that mean?" Theodore demanded. "It means," the attorney said, "the mansion you're standing in is no longer yours." The camera, if this were film, would cut to Charlotte's trembling hand clutching the edge of the table, the diamond on her ring refracting panic instead of light. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens echoed. Not police. Couriers, legal officers delivering documents to banks, partners, subsidiaries. Every doorbell in the Van Dorn empire was about to ring with reality. The narrator again, almost whispering, "Revenge doesn't always kick down the door. Sometimes it walks in wearing a tailored suit and leaves behind a receipt." Theodore sank into his chair. "We'll fight this. We'll sue." The attorney closed his folder. "You could, but be advised Helix Global now holds the controlling shares of your primary lender. Any lawsuit would require their approval." He paused, then added softly, "Which, of course, Miss Lewis now owns." Charlotte's voice cracked. She planned this?" "No," the attorney said. "She prepared for it." For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the projector, each slide another nail in a golden coffin. When the attorneys finally left, the family sat motionless. Theodore's empire had collapsed in a single night, not with scandal, not with headlines, but with process. The narrator's final line for the scene: "They thought power meant having the last word. She taught them it means owning the paperwork." By sunrise, the storm wasn't just financial, it was viral. Screens across the world lit up in blue and gold. Number Just a Servant trended first on Twitter, then on every major feed within hours. Clips from the mansion party, Charlotte's laughter, the taunt, the spilled wine looped endlessly, dissected by influencers, analysts, and strangers alike. At first, the internet did what it always does: mock, meme, move on. But then someone posted a clip with context the moment Amara Lewis turned, calm and deliberate, her voice steady as steel. "Funny," she'd said. "I thought this was a fundraiser, not an audition for cruelty." It hit different the second time. The silence, the control, the irony that the woman humiliated on camera was the one financing the entire gala. The narrator's voice cuts in, soft, cinematic. People love spectacle until they realize they were watching history unfold. By noon, the networks were calling her the Silent Storm. Financial news anchors scrambled to explain how a private conglomerate could erase $5 billion overnight. Stock tickers flashed red. Van Dorn Holdings plummeted 68% before trading was suspended. Meanwhile, Helix Global's logo glowed steady on every screen, calm, untouchable. And in the comments sections, something shifted. It wasn't just outrage. It was recognition. She didn't shout. She just ended them. That's not revenge. That's grace with a backbone. In les chasse he Junselven dest any ever, and 70 were behind a router. She turned humiliation into an economic earthquake. Amara Lewis didn't speak publicly. Not once. No statement. No interviews. Just silence, the kind that forces the world to fill in its own guilt. But others spoke for her. Former employees, charity directors, quiet voices from communities her foundation had funded for years. "She built scholarships when others built excuses," one said. "She doesn't need cameras," said another. "She funds futures." Meanwhile, in the Van Dorn mansion, the press had gathered like vultures at dawn. Charlotte hid behind drawn curtains, scrolling through headlines that refused to look away. One banner read, "From Harris to #the fall of Van Dorn." Her phone buzzed a friend's message. "You shouldn't have said that on camera. She owns half the city." Charlotte threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the same marble that once held Amara's spilled wine. Downstairs, her father argued with reporters through a locked gate. "None of this is true," he shouted. She overreacted. But the microphones caught only desperation. No one believed the powerful when they cried unfairness. The narrator's voice returns, measured and sharp. The world had seen enough tears from privilege. What it hadn't seen enough of was consequence. By afternoon, major networks confirmed the truth. Amara Lewis was indeed the founder, CEO, and sole owner of Helix Global Ventures. The very woman the Van Dorn family mocked for being just a servant had in one night dismantled a century-old dynasty. And as journalists pieced the story together, a deeper narrative emerged that Amara had already redirected the $5 billion to a new foundation, one focused on education and entrepreneurship for women of color. That headline became the new anthem. From humiliation to humanity, $5B redirected to the Rose Initiative. The internet didn't just cheer, it reflected. Teachers shared her quotes. Activists replayed her silence as a lesson in restraint. Young entrepreneurs began tagging their dreams with number Helix mindset, dignity over drama, precision over noise. That evening, while the world debated her motives, Amara stood alone on her balcony, watching the snowfall blur the city lights. She didn't need to trend. She didn't need to be thanked. Her grandmother once said, "We don't raise our voices, baby. We raise our standards." This Wands's bride masked it all away. Tonight, the world had finally heard her without her saying a word. 3 weeks later, the snow began to melt. Not just on the streets of Chicago, but in headlines, boardrooms, and the hearts of people who had watched the world tilt. The storm she unleashed had quieted, leaving behind something far more powerful than fear reflection. For most, it began with a press release. Helix Global Ventures, after weeks of silence, issued a single statement under Amara Lewis's signature. No drama, no press conference, no apologies. Just words, clean and final. The resources formerly allocated to Van Dorn Holdings have been redirected to the Rose Initiative, a $5 billion endowment dedicated to education, innovation, and equity for women of color worldwide. True wealth is not measured by possession, but by purpose. The world stopped scrolling. Within hours, financial analysts called it the most elegant act of reallocation in modern capitalism. Others called it poetic justice disguised as philanthropy. But for millions watching online, it was something else entirely, a vindication of quiet strength. The narrator's voice returned, low and reverent. She didn't just take power back, she redefined what it was for. Across the city, billboards changed overnight. The familiar Helix logo now appeared beside a new one, a single rose in gold outline, blooming through steel. Underneath, the Rose Initiative, because dignity deserves infrastructure. By the next morning, the initiative's website crashed from global traffic. Applications poured in from Kenya, Detroit, Lagos, Mumbai, young women pitching startups, teachers requesting funding, single mothers submitting scholarship essays at kitchen tables. Amara's inbox overflowed with letters. Not praise, gratitude. You made me believe I could walk into rooms without asking for permission. My daughter wants to build something now. She says she wants to be quietly unstoppable. You turned humiliation into hope. And for the first time since the gala, Amara smiled a real one, small and unguarded. In her office, the skyline reflected endless possibilities. She stood beside Rachel, her chief of staff, reviewing the first batch of grants. "They're calling it a revolution," Rachel said softly. "The markets, the media, everyone wants a statement." Amara shook her head. "Revolutions shout, 'This one will work.'" She pointed to the proposal at the top of the stack, a young engineer from South Africa, building affordable solar grids for rural schools. "Fund it," she said. "Then fund the next one." Rachel smiled. "And the press? And the waste in Alden 22. Let them chase noise," Amara said. "We'll build infrastructure." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the Van Dorn estate stood empty. Auctioneers moved through echoing halls, tagging paintings and furniture with quiet efficiency. Charlotte watched from the sidewalk as movers carried out the chandelier that had once glittered above her cruelty. Reporters waited across the street, cameras aimed like judgment. She didn't speak, she couldn't. For the first time in her life, she understood silence not as humiliation, but as consequence. The narrator cuts in, gentle but unflinching. Humility arrives late for some, but it never leaves empty-handed. The Rose Initiative launched its first event that month. Not a gala, not a spectacle. A community center in the south side of Chicago. Wooden stage, folding chairs, no red carpet. Amara arrived quietly, no entourage. Just her, and a simple speech printed on recycled paper. When she took the podium, the crowd fell silent. Not the silence of awe, but of recognition. "Years ago," she began, "I thought the highest form of power was control, but I've learned something better. Power that doesn't serve becomes poison. Wealth that doesn't circulate becomes decay." She paused, scanning faces young, old, hopeful. The Rose Initiative isn't about revenge. It's about redirection. Because what was meant to crush us can still fund our rise. Every dollar once used to exclude will now build doors that never close. Applause erupted, not thunderous, but steady, like a heartbeat finding rhythm. Behind her, a large screen displayed a quote from her grandmother, the same woman who once scrubbed floors for strangers. "We don't shout to be heard. We build so they can't forget." Yet a problement. Amara turned to the screen, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the legacy. Not the fall of a family, the rise of a generation." Outside, reporters finally caught up to her as she exited into the winter dusk. "Miss Lewis, do you have any comment for the Van Dorn family?" one called out. Amara stopped for just a second, adjusting her gloves against the cold. Then she looked straight into the camera, calm, unbothered. "I wish them peace," she said simply. "And I hope they learn the same lesson I did, that grayscale's better than greed." The crowd hushed. The line would headline every outlet by midnight, but she didn't wait for applause. She simply turned, stepped into her car, and disappeared into the falling snow. The narrator's voice lingers over the closing frame. $5 billion changed hands that month, but something far more valuable changed hearts. Because when power learns empathy, legacy begins. The scene fades from the bright lights of the city to a close-up of a single rose blooming through concrete, golden petals catching the dawn. A year later, the city looked different. The skyline hadn't changed, but the spirit had. The same towers that once symbolized distance now shimmered with something quieter dignity. Helix Global had grown larger than ever, yet Amara Lewis lived smaller. No entourage, no designer gowns, no interviews. She had learned that when you move mountains, you don't need to stand on top of them. The Rose Initiative had funded over 400 projects across 23 countries. Schools built in forgotten towns, women-led startups in tech deserts, solar grids in communities that once went dark after sunset. The world had tried to make her an icon. She refused. She wasn't interested in being worshipped. She wanted to be replicated. The narrator's voice opens the epilogue with cinematic calm. History doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers through changed lives. In a sunlit classroom in Detroit, a girl named Zariah typed on a donated laptop. Her teacher asked where the computer came from. Zariah smiled. "From a woman who turned disrespect into funding." In Lagos, an engineer powered an entire school block using recycled batteries. When journalists asked about her inspiration, she replied, "Amara Lewis, she made silence louder than scandal." In Sao Paulo, a muralist painted her portrait across a cracked concrete wall, not with crowns or jewels, but with books, tools, and open doors. Underneath, a single line read, "Grace built this." Meanwhile, the Van Dorn mansion stood empty. Its marble halls were now part of a public arts program under the Rose Initiative. The ballroom, once a theater of humiliation, had been transformed into a mentorship space for young entrepreneurs. And that chandelier, the one that had witnessed cruelty, now hung above a circle of folding chairs. Every week, women gathered beneath it to share their business ideas, their failures, their hopes. The light refracted across their faces like a blessing reclaimed. Charlotte Van Dorn had left the city months ago. No cameras, no statements. But quietly, she began volunteering at one of the Rose Initiative's community centers in D.C. No one there knew her last name. She introduced herself as Charlie. When a young intern asked what brought her there, she smiled faintly. "I used to think money made you untouchable," she said. "Turns out it just makes the fall louder." "A Dallin. It is 8. The narrator's voice returns, thoughtful, almost kind. Some lessons cost fortunes. Others simply cost pride. Back in Chicago, Amara stood on the same balcony where she had once watched the world unravel. Now the air was still, no storms, no breaking news, just the hum of a city rebuilding itself on quieter foundations. Rachel, her chief of staff, approached with a small box. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside was a letter, handwritten in uneven script. No return address. Just 3 words at the top. "Thank you, Miss Lewis." Amara unfolded it carefully. "You don't know me. I was one of the girls cleaning up after that gala. I saw everything, the way they talked to you, the way you didn't flinch. I thought power was about shouting. You showed me it's about choosing when not to. I'm in college now. The Rose paid for it. I'll make sure your name means something here too." Amara read it twice, her eyes glistening not from sadness, but from the weight of understanding that legacy wasn't what people remembered. It was what they continued. She looked up at the horizon, the sky streaked with late autumn light. In that glow, she could almost see her mother's reflection apron tied, hands raw, smiling anyway. "Would she be proud?" Rachel asked quietly. Amara nodded. "She'd say we finally cleaned the right house." They both laughed soft, honest laughter. That night, she walked alone through the old Van Dorn estate, now renamed the Helix House of Innovation. The marble floors echoed differently, not with entitlement, but with ideas. She paused beneath the chandelier, the same one from the video that had gone viral a year earlier. It shimmered quietly, a monument not to wealth, but to change. Amara touched one of the crystal pendants. "Funny," she murmured. "They said I didn't belong here. And now it belongs to everyone." The camera, if this were film, would pan upward from her hand to the chandelier's light, from the chandelier to the open skylight above, where snow began to fall again, gentle as forgiveness. The narrator closes the story, voice warm but steady. She never shouted. She never demanded applause. She simply corrected the balance and left the world to see what grace looked like in practice. Because dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't just restore one life. It rewrites the equation for everyone watching. The screen fades to black. Only her voice remains a whisper that feels like legacy. Power isn't about winning. It's about what you build once you do. And then, one final image. A single rose blooming through cracked marble, the petals catching the sunrise, red as strength, gold as peace. The end.